What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Learning Quick. Super excited to have Paul from Supabase here to talk about startups, growing a product, what Supabase is, and then I'm maybe going to put you on the spot. I don't think it really will be, but I'm thinking of this like technology rapid fire. You just give me your opinion because in your notes that you sent, you were like, I like to talk about dev tools and technologies. And I'm like, why don't we just run through a bunch and we'll see if other people in the chat want to get your opinions on different technologies too. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. Anyway, Paul, welcome to the stream. Thank you for being here. Do you want to give people a little bit of intro, a little bit of background to who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah, thanks, James. My name's Paul Copplestone, full name, but go by Kiwi Couple online. The Kiwi is because I'm from New Zealand originally, but haven't actually lived there for a long time. So I have moved around a lot. I've actually been in Southeast Asia for around 7 years now, and
Wow.
I am a techie of 15 years, and I have been building for a long time, various different industries. I started doing startups when I moved to Southeast Asia. So about 7 years ago, I
Hmm.
got into my first startup. Then I did actually a couple of startups here across different countries here and raised money for all of them. So they're all venture backed. And then my most recent startup is a startup called Supabase. And Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. And what that means is that we're building the features of Firebase using open source tools. We try to use existing open source tools actually, rather than just build everything from scratch.
Yep.
And we just plug everything together to give a really, really nice developer experience.
Cool. And we'll talk more about just the concept of open source and all that kind of stuff. But I think really quickly, one of the big selling points of that perspective in comparison to something like Firebase is now as a developer, as a team of developers that are building a product, I have full control over the thing that I'm working with. I can take it, I can deploy it where I want, I can go and look into the source code if I want to. Like I have full control over that whole package. So I imagine that's kind of the feel, the big reasoning for why you decided to do that.
Yeah, well, actually, the way it happened, so we have a hosted platform as well. The way
Hmm.
it really happened at the start was we love Postgres. My co-founder and myself, Ant, is my co-founder.
Cool.
We really like it, and we were meeting a bunch of developers, and they were saying the same thing. Yeah, love Postgres, great tool, great product. And then we'd say, well, what are you building with today? And they said, well, Firebase. Just it was really easy.
Yep.
So we just decided, look, we're going to make it as easy or easier to use Postgres as it is to use Firebase. And that's really where the positioning came from. And we use a bunch of tools that are open source and can scale very well. And so, yeah, we tackled it that way. And then, of course, the benefits are, we use very scalable tools. Postgres itself is extremely scalable. But then the other thing, as you pointed out, is that if you want to dump your database and take it somewhere else, you can.
Hmm.
If you want to take the whole stack and deploy it on your own cloud or anywhere, run it on your computer, then you can.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful thing. This reminds me, I don't know if you remember this, but Parse
Yep.
was I think were they created by Facebook or were they bought out by Facebook and then just like dumped? Is that I can't remember
Yeah.
exactly what happened,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was similar to Firebase, and then it went away, and then there were some alternate like open source option. Like you could take the source code. I think they open sourced it right at the end. You could take it, you could deploy it somewhere else, but it was never the same. And I think a lot of people kind of got screwed, honestly, because they had invested a lot in this platform that did database and push notifications, authentication, like all the things you would need to build apps. And then all of a sudden, like 6 months, it was gone, and it was just you had to figure it out.
Yeah, honestly, so Pars and Firebase, they came out at the same time. I think they might have even gone through the same YC batch together. And then Pars was
Okay.
bought by, as you said, Facebook, and of course Firebase bought by Google.
Okay.
And both phenomenal tools. This is the thing
Hmm.
that like, Firebase is amazing, especially with all the work that's gone into it. Pars was amazing, and people were loving it. But eventually, Facebook realized that it's just not the thing that they wanted to push into. They didn't want to do hosted platforms. They didn't want to
Yeah.
do their own cloud. So they sort of just open sourced it, and it still runs, and it's a very good product as well. Pars. So yeah, you can still use it, and it's quite mature now. It's just, I guess, not as sexy as Firebase because it's not backed by one of the big players.
Yeah, fair enough. Which I think is I was actually I'd planned on kind of starting this with more about your startup background, but I'm really now like I just can't avoid going into the technical and the product itself. So
Sure.
your branding is the Firebase open source alternative, and I don't know if you've seen this, but on YouTube there is a video by Fireship, a really super big
Mhm.
YouTube channel, and they go through like, is this a real competitor? Is it viable? All these things. And one big takeaway that I saw or that I heard from him is he was like, this is hands down worth it for me to use just for the fact that it's Postgres. So I think that in and of itself, obviously, you and your co-founder are fans of Postgres, and that is kind of a big, I think a big part of why you decided to go the way that you went. Can you talk a little bit about like for Postgres in and of itself, like what's the, I guess this gets into like SQL versus NoSQL database. What are the benefits that you see? I think in terms of scalability, maybe is most relevant with Postgres.
Yeah, scalability is definitely the number one. So that can mean technologically scalability. It can just do faster reads. It can scale larger, store a larger amount of data. It's open source. And then the second thing on scalability is just the code itself. Building relationships between different collections, for example, on Firebase, is quite difficult just because of the technology itself. Versus, when you get to a more enterprise, a more mature product, then actually building these relationships in a relational database is the thing that keeps your code very structured, keeps your product very tight, keeps all your data very clean. So this is another sort of aspect of scalability that we really wanted to do. Of course, it means that when you're starting, it can feel a bit more difficult. You're going to
Yeah.
think about your schema. So
Yeah.
that's the challenge for us. We need to make it extremely easy to use a relational database. And we do it kind of like actually Airtable do. You can build tables
Hmm.
and do everything, add columns, add your data from the dashboard, and then from there you can leverage all of the functionality of Postgres. So you've got functions, triggers, you've got indexes, you've got text search, you've got geographical information systems, you've got extensions, you've got all this tooling that exists out in the open source world, which is phenomenal. So one of the ones that is that we actually employ, um, the lead maintainer of a tool called Postgres, or one of the key maintainers of Postgres, and this is a tool that attaches to your Postgres database. It's Postgres with a T, REST,
Yeah.
and it attaches
Okay.
to your database. Yeah. And then as you change your database schema, the API, it auto generates an API and it will always be up to
Cool.
date
Yeah.
with your database
With the
itself.
schema. Yeah.
So in terms of developer experience, it means that you, as a developer, you just think about how your data should be shaped, and from there, everything flows up
Hmm.
all the way to the top of the stack.
It's really interesting. I feel like trends, for maybe lack of a better word, like my brother-in-law, who's 10 years older than me, born in the 80s, I'm born in the 90s. We've always kind of talked about the differences there, but he's always been really adamant that like things that were popular in the 80s, for example, come back 20 years later. Things that were popular in the
Yeah,
90s come back 20 years later. And I think we're seeing that a lot in tech right now with, I think a lot of people were so excited about NoSQL, and I'm not a database person myself, so I can't have detailed conversations about the difference between SQL and NoSQL. I can make it work in my app. That's not a super big thing, and it works fine. But NoSQL became such a big thing, and it's almost like a lot of people had this like scoff look at SQL databases, like traditional SQL databases, and then we get into like JavaScript gained so much popularity and people really like JavaScript because it's really, and it's the reason it scared me for a while. It's kind of free form. You can kind of do whatever you want. You can make all the mistakes that you might make and they will let you do it. It didn't have it wasn't like an object oriented thing by default. It didn't have strong types, that kind of stuff. But I think we're starting to see more people again more excited about SQL databases. I think we're seeing a lot more people again more excited about a type language, something like TypeScript. I'm seeing more and more just that structure, that control. And that seems to kind of fit, I think, with what you're saying as well, where you get that control of, you know, exactly what your data looks like. That means then you could implement your REST API, GraphQL layer using TypeScript, which means if someone is then making a request, they know exactly what type of data you can get back. So it's kind of funny to see how like perspectives on these technologies change and kind of come and go back and forth over the years.
yeah, everything. new is old basically when it comes to tech. It's one of these things, as you say, there's a 20-year cycle or maybe even 10. Depends which part of the stack you're in. I mean,
Yep.
like, yeah, class-based, object-oriented versus functional. These ones come and go. And yeah, you just see it time and time again. The types one, I mean, largely I just try to not be dogmatic about anything and just try figure out what is the best tool for the job
Yep.
and can it be done easier. And usually, Postgres is one of those sort of Swiss Army knives that you can use universally across everything, just like you could use, say, MongoDB or Firebase. They also are a Swiss Army knife. And so, it's not like you'd start a business with, you'd start building your product with, say, a columnar database or one of these sort of specialty databases, unless, or maybe a graph database, for example, unless you are building like a social network, then you
Hmm.
might use a graph database. So it's just, is it the right tool for the job, and am I going to be able to use it to build very
Yep.
fast? So we're trying to solve the build very fast thing, and then you can choose whether you want to go NoSQL or SQL.
Yeah. Fair enough. I think that's always like there's bike shedding conversations is how like the syntax podcast refers to this a lot with Scott
Yeah.
and Wes. And bike shedding is like more or less talking about things that aren't the most important or like people like giving these really aggressive opinions. And the fact is
Mm.
like almost every answer, even though it seems cliche and it seems like it's a cop out, almost every answer is it depends, right? Like it depends on the scenario, which of these is gonna work best for you. Thinking about the ease of use. So Firebase is this like really, really big, widely used thing. It is really easy to use from the perspective of it wraps a lot of things that you want together. And I think probably the two easiest things there in terms of like I build an app, I need these two things: authentication and data storage of some sort. Um, and so lots of people have gone that route. I actually personally have really struggled when I've tried to use Firebase. The documentation never matches with what I expect or what I'm looking for. I feel like I feel like it should be so much easier the way other people talk about it than my personal experience. So I'm wondering, like, when you think about Supabase and making sure that that experience is really positive, do you have any specific thoughts or like methodologies or anything that's kind of vague, but like your thought process on documentation and samples and just to make sure that that onboarding process for people that are new hopefully is as easy as possible?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that we're not doing.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the thing that people really love about us is, they just get this full blown experience. It's really like a full feature set. I think that's the thing that keeps them going. If
Hmm.
I'm really honest, getting to building with us could be 10 times easier, and we plan to make it even 10 times easier. But as a really quick example for some of the things that we're doing, we've got examples inside our repos, which are, of course, are critical. I don't know if you've seen the Divio, I think it is. They kind of categorize documentation into several different things. It's kind of like
Cool.
reference docs,
Yeah.
which are very important. Here's a method, here's what the method does. Then you've got sort of how-to guides, and then you've got like kind of getting started guides, and then you've got examples. So the examples actually are things that people really love. We can tell because that folder is one of the most visited inside our repo,
Nice.
and we can see from our GitHub, traffic. And then inside this, we've got so we try to make sure that Supabase, you can just use, we've got APIs, we've got everything, but we try to make sure you can just use the database if that's what you want. You just want a Postgres database, then you can use it. So
Hmm.
we've got a bunch of examples. And then inside the examples for our whole stack, we try to do it with, say, Next.js, with React, with Vue, with Nuxt, with all of them. Doesn't matter what it is. We
Yeah.
try to be agnostic with the framework. And then we've got, the Vercel one-click deploy button. So literally you
Nice.
can click a button and then you can get up and running, in literally 2 minutes. It'll start a database for you, deploy to the front end. Then you've got a full working application with logins, auth, row level security, everything that you need out of the box.
Yeah. It's so that concept again is why like Firebase has done so well. And I think it's why people are like everything I hear about Superbase is super positive for what it's worth. And I think that's why, because like as a developer these days, I shouldn't struggle to figure out where and how to host something. I shouldn't struggle to figure out where and how to host a database. I shouldn't struggle to figure out where and how to connect to that database. Like that's just not the stuff as a developer I want to worry about. And that's what I'm most excited about when I look at different products, and especially with Supabase being the same thing. Like as a developer, I just want to write code for the thing that I want to build, and I don't want to do all the other shit. Basically, is what it comes down to. Like, and I don't feel like I should need to. And so I've had lots of conversations on this stream specifically. One of them recently was Amplication. If you've seen that one, it can help kind of do database modeling and then build out a node with TypeScript backend as well. And that sort of like jumpstart just it makes it so much easier as a developer to feel super empowered because now I can use a product like Supabase, I can get started quickly, and I can build something. Like I don't have to spend months figuring out quote unquote the boring stuff, I guess, or at least for me, right?
Yeah,
Like I can get to actually writing the code. And I think that's what people are so excited about. That's what gets me super interested. And then a particular reason why I wanted to talk to you and have you on to talk about Superbase.
yeah. Well, it's one of our taglines. Of course, like the open source Firebase alternative is sort of the thing that positions us, but really our tagline, at least internally, is build in weekends, scale to millions, and that's really our
Love it.
goal. We just
Yeah.
want to reduce the time to value, and the value for us is, are you as a developer building something, getting it out there into the market,
Hmm.
and that's what we consider as a valuable thing. And we track, we're taking your API requests through, and we're about to present them in your dashboard to see, so you can see how many API requests you're receiving without setting all this up. And that's the thing that we try to drive: the number of API requests that you are going to make. We don't charge on this, so we don't care whether you're making lots of them. But if you're making lots of API requests or your product is receiving them, then it means that you have a successful product. And that's really our goal, is to make sure that developers are super successful.
Yeah. I imagine that's part of the fun too. It's just being able to celebrate that success, which this is kind of a cheesy pivot, but I'm going to do a huge shout out for Catherine, who's in the chat. Catherine was on the stream last week, and she built, I don't know if you've seen this, readme.so. And it's kind of a GUI, a drag and drop thing to build README files, which is just absolutely like spot on perfect. And people loved it. It's gotten really popular. And she was getting job offers and stuff from people just based on that. And she just announced today on Twitter that she's joining GitHub. Like, what a wild experience where she built something in a weekend, kind
Mm.
of the learn in public type thing. Maybe that'll be a transition to that in a second. But she did that in a weekend. It like just kind of blew up, honestly. I don't think she ever envisioned it doing that based on our conversation, but has led to like tons of awareness for her and the product, and then job offers, and ultimately now working at GitHub. So I just want to give Catherine a shout out and congratulations on that. That is a super base cool cool story and cool outcome of that.
That's amazing, and it's a very cool tool. People should check it out if they're about to build a repo or you want to clean up your own README. Then yeah,
Yes.
definitely check it out.
Yeah. That's I mentioned I recorded a video on that topic and published it on Tuesday actually. But I mentioned like when I first started with Markdown myself, it was really intimidating. Not because it's difficult, just because I'd never seen it before and I thought it was much more difficult than it was. So this would be a great way to kind of kick that process off and kind of have someone else help you start that way. So I mentioned maybe this is a good transition. So the idea of learning in public was one of the things that you put, or learning slash building in public. And I'm kind of curious, like how much, if any, so far of Supabase has been like the learn slash build in public type thing versus I think you're going to start doing more of that stuff, or at least that's your goal. So what's your take on like the learn in public process? What does that mean to you? And then what does that mean in terms of stuff that you might do in the near future?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love it. I love build in public as a concept. Is just awesome. I mean, as an open source company, I just think that's the way to do everything. But also, it just lowers the barrier for everyone else who's trying to learn, right? You
Hmm.
see people making mistakes and you can figure
Yes.
out how they're doing processes. I remember when I was trying to learn, everything's done sort of behind a Google search. And now you've got these videos where you can sort of see people stumbling through projects. How do they think about things? I think is awesome. So yeah, of course, everything we do is in public, but it's on GitHub. But the other part of it that we decided that we're going to try start doing is that we're going to build. Well, I just started about 3 weeks ago a live stream And this is where, yeah, I need your help, your advice.
This is
But a
where we're
live
gonna be
stream,
best friends.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I started live streaming for 1 hour every week, and
Yeah.
it's kind of more, I'm not necessarily building, or I don't really know where it's going to go, but at the moment, I'm just kind of solving bugs, and I'm trying to show people, what would you do as a maintainer of a repo?
Yeah.
What do you have to do to encourage people to get in, to, go through pull requests, respond to issues, and that's really what I'm doing, which probably seems quite boring to a lot of people. Maybe they don't want to see it, but it's quite fun. I think a
Hmm.
lot of people ask, well, how do I get into open source?
Yep.
And so people can see, well, I know how to build, but it's quite daunting making your first pull request, or adding an issue, doing anything like this. So we just really want to lower the barrier for this, and part of our thing at Supabase is we don't want to build just our own tools. We want to support existing communities. So just bringing a focus to some of the existing Postgres itself, Postgres, maybe these things I can highlight in the stream so that they can get more contributors
Yep.
as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting for me thinking about being an open source contributor. So I'm a content creator. That's a big part of what I do personally and at work. And I've had the question before of like, are you active in open source? And I kind of don't know how to answer that, or maybe I do. And I think the answer is no. Like I have a lot of projects on GitHub. I do a lot of crash course type videos where I have the code is on GitHub. I do the YouTube video. I send people to the source code if they want it. I have a couple of actual courses where there's source code available. But I think that is totally different than really being an open source contributor because I don't have a lot of experience of like handling PRs and issues and things in repositories. Like I kind of, for the most part, I create that project, that sample is there, and then I'm more or less done with it. So I don't really consider myself definitely not to be like a maintainer and really not a big open source contributor. And I say that to mean that like that's the kind of stuff that would still be valuable for me. Like as much stuff that I do on GitHub, I don't have that experience. So I think exactly what you just said, not only for someone with me as an experienced developer would be super interesting, but especially for people who are maybe getting started and that will be part of like their everyday workflow at a job that they're going to work at if they haven't already started the job that they might start in the next year or so. To have that sort of skill, to have that sort of awareness of how that stuff works, I think would be really valuable.
Yeah, well, I mean, even what you do, I'm sure there's a lot of people that watch your stream, and maybe it's scary even putting something online. I know for a
Mhm.
lot of students who are learning, they think, I don't want to put my code in.
Yep.
On GitHub, they think there's going to be a million people who see a bug or something like that. Whereas the truth is, good luck getting 1 star on that. On that, so I mean, we just want to lower the barriers. I guess you're lowering the barriers, and eventually you seep into communities. I saw a really good video the other day from a guy. I forget his name. Hopefully, we can share it somewhere. But he's building Serenity OS, and he
Okay.
talks about he does live streams as well, and he kind of talks about his life and things like this while he's also coding up this operating system from scratch. He's building
Super
a whole
casual, no
operating
big
system.
deal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very cool, and he's got quite a cool life story. He was an addict and everything, and now he's working full time on
Yeah.
Serenity. But yeah, he talks about participating in open source versus contributing. And what he's trying to say is that you should embed yourself in a community, get involved, and read the discussions and everything, which is probably a lot of work for most people. I really don't mind if we get what he calls drive-by patches. People who just drop an issue
Yeah.
and then they sort of leave. We would love to get more people participating, answering our GitHub discussions, answering the issues. But also, we don't mind if people are just coming in and you know leaving a comment or
Hmm.
doing a quick patch, fixing a spelling mistake. These are things that we find very valuable as just one more contributor. And that's great.
Yep. Absolutely. I think like Gatsby, I think was a great example of rewarding those contributions because they had I think like three contributions and they could be grammar mistakes or like whatever. Would get you like a t-shirt and five would get you a hoodie or like they had some sort of store point system that you could get stuff. But yeah, I think that
Cool.
is how you start to grow in my job in developer relations, it's all about relationships. And I think that's how you start to build a little bit of a relationship, even if it's not one to one, right? Like just to see that their work and their time to create that issue is appreciated, or that
Hmm.
PR is appreciated, I think goes a long way for people. Um, and then encourages, I think, to your point, to come back and do it again, right? Like if that's a good process, they feel appreciated. Then the next time they see it, it's going to be worth it to do it again. And instead of like you do one, no one responds, then you're never going to do it again, right? Like you're just like, okay, well, it's not worth my time for you to
Yeah,
not care.
exactly. Yeah. And it's good. I mean, the more people that are in, more eyes on bugs, it's good for everyone, really. I mean, we benefit from people patching everything. So it's a little bit selfish, I guess, as well. We want our community to be bigger,
Yep.
but we just, yeah, really try to foster the community and make sure it's a great place to hang out.
Cool. Well, maybe thinking about growing before we get into like growing the community, I want to take a step back to think about just like kind of the startup perspective. I want to know a little bit about your background in startups, and then how you got into Supabase specifically. And I think I mentioned this to you before we started recording, but like I can really see myself building some sort of product at some point, a SaaS or I mean probably a SaaS or like, I don't know, a framework or something, like some sort of tool I can see myself building at some point. And so there's a difference between kind of building something like that for fun and then really making like a true product out of it. And I think that's what you've already proven to do. But I want to, before we get into the growth, go back to like your experience in startups and then how did Supabase actually start?
Yeah, so my first startup was actually a B2C marketplace. So it's a marketplace is a very hard. If you're in the US, you might know Thumbtack. It's basically this marketplace where you can look for a service provider and you put your job. Maybe you need to get your house cleaned, or you need to
Hmm.
fix your order a locksmith, something like that. Then on the other side is the all the service providers, maybe thousands of them, millions of them, and yeah, for us it was thousands, and then they would respond, and they would respond with quotes, then they'd fulfill
Hmm.
the job. So it was a mobile application.
Cool.
So that was it. It was in three different countries. We're in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, still running actually. And I did that for 2 years as the CTO. Then I actually moved to Singapore for an accelerator called Entrepreneur First. And this one is like a 3 month program. It's quite strange. You come in without an idea, pre-idea, and they throw
Oh,
a
wow.
hundred people in a room. It's quite a novel way of doing things.
And you're
And
like,
usually,
make magic.
yeah, 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 yeah. They're like, okay, you're gonna start a business in 3 months.
You're
The
like,
only
cool,
thing
cool,
is,
cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And everyone thinks, that's doable. Um, but really, that's a lot of work. It's very hard. And the other thing that makes it very hard is they have this way of doing it where it's a deep tech accelerator. So they try to do very, very technical things, and they throw half the people are sort of PhD students, quantum physicists, maybe
Mm,
mathematicians, people working on very obscure material sciences, and then the other half are kind of domain experts or product people. So, yeah, I spent 3 months building an augmented reality platform that would scale across the world.
wow.
And that was quite interesting. We were using sort of mathematical models to make sure we could build these distributed systems. Then after a while, yeah, I decided that this one was a great business, fascinating tech, but not a good business.
Hmm.
Very hard to monetize. It's going to be a long shelf life basically before it ends up being a feasible business.
Yep.
So then I left and I actually did another startup, which is a B2B, and is sort of servicing offices, and it had a tech component to it where you'd have all these sort of widgets, I guess, gadgets around the house, and the labor force would use mobile once again. So that one we actually used Firebase for the chat. We had this
Oh, cool.
application for our workers, and all the office staff would also use it, and it's sort of co-working spaces, all these sort of things. And our staff would chat to all the co-working space sort of staff using in-app chat, and it looked exactly, because in Southeast Asia they're not very tech savvy, a lot of the crowd. So the chat inside had to look exactly like WhatsApp, because that's the only tool
Because
that they
that's what
know.
yeah, that's funny.
So we'd have a lot of these. You call them aunties, sort of 60-year-old ladies. The aunties would be coming in to learn tech, and we'd just teach them how to use our application. Click the blue button, then you can use WhatsApp.
Yep.
And we had built this with Firebase, and I came across a fairly obscure scaling bug that you can't send you can't update a document more than once per second. You can, but you won't get a notification basically. So
Oh, like
the way I,
you won't get the real time updates from a consumer.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and the way that I had structured the database, I kind of needed that for the
Hmm.
notifications and the updates to the application. So I faced a choice: either I restructure the Firebase database, or I can actually migrate it to our Postgres database. We're doing everything else with Postgres. So I decided the latter. I
Mm,
migrated it because Postgres has a JSON-B storage. I ran them both in parallel, and I built a sync engine between the two.
yeah.
Then, yeah, I actually ran into a very similar bug when I had the Postgres database. Postgres has got this thing called notify. You can notify when an event happens inside the database. And I was using that for all our notifications, of course. I didn't know at the time, but there's this limit. You can send out a payload of 8,000 bytes. So as the messages started getting bigger and bigger, this payload was getting bigger and bigger, and all these things started dropping. So I ended up building this open source tool called Realtime, Supabase Realtime. What it does is it makes the database sort of think that we're another database, a replication target. So we listen to the Postgres replication stream. So when a database is replicating data between two different databases to keep
Then
up to
you
date.
can do something with the data.
Yep. So we basically take the stream, it's a binary stream of data, we convert
Yeah.
it into JSON data, then we blast it out over WebSockets. So we've got this
Wow.
server sitting here, and then you can connect in with your mobile phones to this WebSocket server. We listen to the stream and we blast it out over this WebSocket server. So I ended up open sourcing that, and it started getting traction. And yeah, we just put it, I think it was the end of 2019. And then one of my friends who I met in Entrepreneur First, that accelerator that I talked about, I had lived with him for 1 year, and he's just one of the best techies I know, and just really a great guy. And I said, hey, I want to build this business. I want to go to YC. I want to build this DevTools business that I've been dreaming about for years now. And are you keen? And he was dead keen. So we started a couple of months later.
That's awesome. Wow. One, the technology there that's really impressive, I guess is part of the word. Like it's fun to get that technical with stuff. And I've always I guess I've just assumed that it works somewhat like that. But every client that you're connecting to, either Supabase or Firebase, like you're having some socket connection where it's able to pump data back and forth. So it sounds like you intercepted the stream that Postgres would use to replicate itself, and then just sent that data out on the WebSockets, which is really cool.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. So you mentioned wanting to do YC for people that are out there. YC is Y Combinator, which is the term accelerator. Is that what they are? I don't know the technical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Accelerator. Yeah.
so they are one of the most well known accelerators in the country, maybe the world. Like
The world. Yeah.
yeah,
If you're
they're
yeah, a techie outside of the US, everyone knows it.
yeah, fair enough.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, so if people haven't heard of that, really big deal in the like I want to build a startup and grow it type thing. If you can get in there, I think you're doing pretty well. So what does the pitch look like? Like what's your selling point? Like how do you go and apply to YC and say not only is this just an idea I have, but it's something that's going to grow, people are going to use it, this is what it's going to do. And then I'm assuming part of that conversation that I'd be interested in um it's like what's the monetization plan? Because that like people that invest are going to look for a return, right?
Of
And so I'm
course.
kind
Yeah.
of curious what that monetization plan looks like after getting into, or maybe it's part of the pitch. I don't know.
Yeah, well, so it's funny that you say pitch because it really kind of is like that. The process for YC is you apply for a batch. They have two batches per year, a
Hmm.
winter batch and a summer batch. And then we were, for example, part of Summer 2020, the Summit batch.
Hmm.
Then what you do is you apply. Then you get sort of accepted for an interview. And in the past, no matter where you are from, they would fly you to San Fran. And then you would have this interview, and the interview is 10 minutes long. They would literally fly you in for this 10
Oh
minute
wow,
interview.
what
Yeah, crazy.
for 10?
And it's intense. It's quite everyone knows that these sort of these interviews are very intense, and you've
Hmm.
got to train for them. You do mock interviews and everything. So yeah, we applied. We actually had two interviews. They at the time, I think they had started sort of double checking anyone outside the US will do a pre-interview, then they'll decide whether they'll fly
Hmm.
you based on your application. So we did a
Sure.
pre-interview, we had done a video demo, and then we did this Zoom. This was when COVID was kicking off, so
Yep.
everything was on Zoom by that point. And we did this Zoom call, and yeah, it's just six people sitting there. Michael Seibel, if you know him, he's the god founder. He's really knows how to do startups, and now he runs YC. And yeah, so it's just them grilling you for 10 minutes, and you've got to answer your questions,
For 10
on
minutes.
point. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they'll really grill you on whatever. They'll try find your weaknesses, and it'll be product weaknesses. How do you assess the market? How are you going to scale? What's your traction? What is everything? But they accept people from basically pre-idea all the way up to post-idea already
Hmm.
making revenue. As long as you deliver, you've kind of got an idea. You're coming in as a solid founder. You know you're ambitious. You know what you want to do. You look like a successful founder. I think you can get in based on that criteria.
Yeah. Wow. So 10, I mean, I guess part of it, they probably do a ton of these. So they're
Yeah,
probably just like bringing people in and doing 30 interviews a day or something if they're doing them 10 minutes at a time. I don't know, but that's
more,
really wild.
more. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they do thousands of interviews for one batch, and then in the end,
Gosh.
in our batch were 250 companies. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's sort of tens of thousands of these interviews across all of
Yeah.
the partners. So it's a
Wow.
high bar you've got to get in, but now they're starting to expand it as well. So I think the last batch was 350
Hmm.
companies, and they're said now that they're going to do all of them remote. So it'll grow for sure.
Okay. Wow. That's wild. B Dougie is commenting in the chat that he knows Michael and says that he was also on the founding team of Twitch, ironically.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yes.
ironically
Yes.
because we're here discussing it on Twitch.
Yeah, he was correct.
That's awesome. Um, so I guess the next question for me is like where like I think one of the hard things with comparing yourself to Firebase is it's been around for a long time, right? So you look at like all the things that they offer. Those have
Hmm.
been in the works for 10 years or more, like however long they've been around. I'm not exactly sure. So what's kind of the state of Supabase in terms of feature set now? What are maybe some of the things you're looking to add? And then maybe a separate question after that is just a little bit of a conversation around growth of the platform as a whole.
Sure. Yeah. So what we currently have is yeah, Firebase was a suite of 18 tools. I think now it's just grown since the last one. We probably won't hit all 18,
Yeah.
but what we have right now is database, and we've got auth, and we've got storage. These are the three key things,
And
and everything's
storage in that case would be like blob storage, like files.
exactly
Okay.
photos, videos,
Yep.
audio,
Cool.
anything that's big outside of the database.
Yep.
Then we are going to also target functions. So everyone asks for
Mm,
functions,
yep.
really a lot of people, but we're going to do it in quite a novel way. Our next release, we're going to build a workflow engine. So it's not just, a database event hits your yeah, or a database event triggers a function.
Hmm.
Usually there's a bunch of logic you want to put in between these two, right? So and you might want to say, for example, a user signs up, send them an email. But you might also want to say, 10 users sign up in bulk. For each user, send them an email now, send them one in 3 days, and send them one in
Hmm.
1 year's time. And then you're going to trigger a function, but that function also might be a service. It could be send a event to Stripe, send an event to Mailgun, whatever you want. So it's kind of like a enterprise grade Zapier, and this is what
Yeah.
we're building. We're building this workflows tool. We're doing it right now, and what we've done is
That's
taken
neat.
a open source state machine, which is Amazon's step functions. They've actually open sourced the spec for it called states language. We're taking that and we're building an open source tool which can read the states language, and then you can build all these workflows in between. So that's part of our function story, and it should be working very nicely with the Postgres database once again.
Cool.
But yeah, that's our next big release.
That's cool. That's really neat. So would that be it would not. So you mentioned like the comparison to Zapier, but this would, I guess I just asked, would it be code or no code or low code or a combination of those?
Yeah, so everything we do is kind of a bit of both. You've got this dashboard where you'll build things, but the workflows themselves will actually be, JSON data. And actually, you can take this JSON data, you can use it in AWS, or you could use it in now Supabase is the idea.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's actually a formal specification, so it is code.
Okay,
You just don't need to, if you want to build them from the dashboard, you wouldn't need to code them up. The
cool.
benefit is, of course, you store it in Git, and of course, we're
Yep.
wrapping, Git around everything. We're going to do migrations. All of these specifications will be stored inside your database. So you dump your database once again, and you take everything to your nearest provider if you don't like Supabase, and it'll just work as well. You can use our open source tools.
Yeah. Neat. That's super cool. And then this is maybe just more of a specific question for me, but I think someone kind of mentioned something relevant to this in a second or earlier. Maybe it was on Twitter. The idea of Supabase being open source. So you can also host Supabase on Supabase, right? Or you could host it yourself. So if you're doing the hosting through Supabase itself, that's hosting the Postgres database as well as like the API backend kind of thing, like that stuff would go there. Is that right?
Exactly. You don't need to do anything if you sign up to our platform. You just
Hmm.
get it all pre-configured and there's this dashboard and everything. If you're hosting it yourself, then you can deploy. We give like a Docker Compose file. You can deploy it to wherever you want, anything that hosts Docker Compose, right? Or Docker images. The
Okay.
only thing that, yeah, I'll put a caveat out there. Our dashboard at the moment isn't open source, and we're trying to open source a lot more of it now.
Mm.
The key is that because yeah, when we were starting to build, we had all our billing and everything tightly integrated to our dashboard. So we're slowly moving it all out. We've got a UI library, which is now open source. We just open source the grid, and we'll open source a bunch of the other UI stuff so that you can also host the dashboard yourself and put it anywhere you want.
Cool. Okay. That is awesome. And so I want to make sure I understand the idea of the full dashboard is not open source yet. So what this means is if I want to host this on my own, I need to have somewhere to host a Postgres database. I need a place to host the backend functionality, the APIs and things that I would interact with that then interact with Postgres. But I then right now would not have access to the dashboard that is provided through Supabase. But that is the idea that that would be open source as well.
Correct,
Cool.
correct. That will eventually be open source. And of course, all we're doing is wrapping Postgres. Our dashboard is just trying to
Yeah.
make Postgres very easy, right? So
Yep.
you can plug whatever other, I mean, dbeaver, you can use Table Plus, you can use any of these tools and actually, interact with your database that way. And
Okay.
that's what our dashboard is doing, but we just have a nice interface for it.
Cool. This may this is where I divulge from like what I think is the most relevant for people watching the stream to me just being like, I want to have my specific questions answered.
Okay.
um, one of my big pet peeves with Firebase. This is one of those things I mentioned earlier that seems like it should be easier than it is. The documentation for me around how to do authorization rules. So like with Firebase, because you consume data directly from a client, you don't have like
Mhm.
a secret API key or anything. And so interacting with data is really dependent upon the user being logged in through Firebase and then rules on the back end that say can't update this without owning the record or being logged in and so on and so on. Like the difference or the combination of authentication, being logged in, and then authorization having access to do a thing. When you mentioned the dashboard and not being completely open source yet, and mainly being a wrapper around Postgres, where and how do you define that authorization? So I think that it's in. You can do that in the dashboard. You'll have to clarify for me. But yeah, so how does that process work? Is it similar to Firebase where you can do everything from a client, you use Supabase authentication, and then you have those authorization rules written on the back end? Is that right? Or in the dashboard?
That's correct. Yep. And once again, you can do them in the dashboard, but actually, our authorization rules are Postgres row level security. It's actually something that exists inside Postgres. You can actually
Hmm.
specify some SQL that says, okay, based on this rule, this user can access this row. And
Okay.
this is been in Postgres for many years, and we just make that extremely easy. So, for example, if you are going to build a React application, we provide all these wrappers around authentication. So you can log a user in using our APIs. That will create a JWT for the user with the user ID.
Nice.
It comes through all the way to the database level. The database then can inspect the JWT and get the user ID out of it, get their role out of it, and then you can use the user's ID and role to actually write these rules within your
Yeah.
database. And then the cool thing is, of course, because it's once again just Postgres, these rules that you're writing, you can use them in any, you can dump the database, you can use those same rules in another Postgres provider. It's
Hmm.
nothing bespoke to Supabase. We're just trying to make Postgres really, really easy. And we're trying to
Yeah.
expose the cool functionality that exists inside Postgres already.
Okay. So this clears up something. So in the Fireship video, he kind of mentioned this idea of using SQL to do these rules, and I had no idea that this existed. So I was kind of like, is that I didn't know if I understood him correctly. I had no idea that this was part of Postgres. I had no idea that you could define these authorization rules like that. I love the idea of that being something that is standardized and has been around for a while and can be used in other scenarios than just Supabase, because I don't know if I clarified this. My struggle with authorization rules and stuff in Firebase is I felt like the documents, like I never knew, I never felt comfortable. And part of it's I never did it enough. Like if I did it a few times on a project, I'm sure I would get there. But I just hadn't. So every time I went to look at it, I was like, this just really isn't clear to me. So having a standard that you're following for that, that's already a part of Postgres, that's really interesting. I really like that idea.
It's also very cool because, when you build your tables in Postgres, you've got this schema, right? It's called the public schema, and you put your rules on this schema. You can create whatever schemas you want. Now, for storage, when we released storage, we really wanted to leverage Postgres once again, everything live inside the database.
Hmm.
So we created this schema inside everyone's database called storage. And it actually, so all the storage is in S3 or any S3 compatible backend, but the structure of all the folders and files lives inside your Postgres database. So actually the access rules that you write for, okay, my users can access this file, all those rules are once again just written in Postgres row level security. So if you know how to, write it for your tables, you also know how to write it for
Yeah.
your storage schema. And because everything's sitting once again inside your Postgres database, you can read it using SQL. You can, fetch all your files, the file names, the folder structure. Everything is just right there in your database, right at the bottom of your stack, ready to go. You can plug things on top, extract the data out, but because it's right down in the bottom of the stack, it's just always available, always ready to use.
Cool. Yeah, that's really neat. When you mentioned the JWT. So in the login process, you get a JWT that gets sent, I imagine, on subsequent requests back to Supabase. And you mentioned that that could be decoded and grab the user ID and any role information out of it. I'm assuming Postgres doesn't automatically do that JWT parsing. Like when it goes to Supabase, your code will parse the JWT, grab the appropriate information, r- and then send the right information to the database along with the original request info. Does that make sense?
Yeah, through Postgres, REST, the one with the
Hmm.
T on the end,
Yeah.
that actually, yeah, we provide the JWT secret. Sorry for the people who aren't technical, but basically, yeah, it's the same JWT secret from the database all the way up the stack. And so then it can interpret the JWT at that point, and then it passes it through to the database as just the header information. And then you
Cool.
can inspect the header information inside the Postgres. And all we do within the auth schema, all the auth tables live inside your database. So all your users are stored inside your database as well. Then we just have a bunch of functions that make it very easy. For example, auth.uid means get the user ID
Hmm.
out of the headers.
Yep.
And so you use that and you've got the user ID auth.role as a function
Yep.
that gets the user's role out of it.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. And maybe last question on that. When the JWT comes back from the login process, how is that tracked on a client? Is that stored? Is it like a local storage, or is it tracked in memory or?
Yep. So we've got a JavaScript client, and actually, yeah. So our auth server is actually Netlify's go-to server, and
Oh,
we
okay.
have run a fork of it. This is,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
I touched on at the start, making sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. We
Hmm.
try to support existing tools. So we use GoTrue. I'm sure B. Dougie knows it very well because
Yep.
I think he actually worked on it. Um, so yeah, we use that for authentication. That actually provides all the JWT stuff. Then we
Cool.
have a JavaScript library which stores it, yeah, in local storage, or you can inject your own storage mechanism
Hmm.
for if you want to do it, and then memory, and then it has the refresh and everything going there. So everything's very easy from
Cool.
the JavaScript client all the way down to the database.
Yeah. Nice. That again goes. I think you said it perfectly. Like the leveraging stuff that already exists is really neat. And
Mm.
I think that's like now Supabase is kind of going to be a big part of that story for other developers as well, right? Like now developers can leverage Supabase that with all that stuff that already put other stuff together, but now I as a developer can leverage Supabase to do the thing that I'm looking to do. Um, I mentioned kind of the idea like this is not meant to be like a put you on the spot thing. I think these are hopefully natural conversation things, but just like a tech. Give me your thoughts, not necessarily rapid fire, but I'll send you a couple of things, and you can just give whatever thoughts you have on
Okay, okay,
them.
yep. I'll prepare
um,
myself.
yeah, I think this is probably we've touched on a little bit, but just the idea of SQL versus no SQL.
Yep. Well, my preference is SQL, of course. I like the type safety. That's very, very good. And my preference really is more Postgres because it's got JSON B columns, so it's sort of a best of both worlds.
Okay, and the JSON B column, is that the ability to store raw JSON as a property?
Correct?
Okay,
Yep.
got it.
Raw JSON, create indexes on it, extract data from it, do operations on it. It's got it all. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. This is where my knowledge of databases does not suffice because I've got like a bunch of things are running through my head right now. um, by the way, for going back to our streaming conversation, I'm slightly getting interrupted. I think which way? This way. You can see that light just turned on back
Hmm.
there, the green one. That is actually from a Twitch chat bot that I have. So you're not watching the stream, I don't think, but someone sent they redeemed their points in Twitch to run that command, which my chatbot is listening for on my local computer, and then it's talking to these hue lights. And it actually, I've got two, the one you can't see. So anyway, that sort of interaction stuff has been super fun for me. And then typically, people have really enjoyed being able to interact with the stream in that way. So if you ever get into
Yeah,
like
that's cool.
ways to keep people engaged, giving them something that they can change and see, I think is a lot of fun. So
Okay.
build,
My next live
yeah,
stream, that's going to be
yeah.
green.
I will be ready and waiting to see what kind of cool interactions and like all of that. See, the thing I like about Supabase is you can use it to build anything, and you could use Supabase to do like where I store some of my stream information in Airtable. You could store all your stream information in Supabase and do real time. Anyway, yeah, infinite possibilities. Um, Thinking about, you mentioned like the type safety with SQL versus no SQL. What about TypeScript? I imagine you do a lot of JavaScript development. Are you a TypeScript fan? Is that what you would look to use if you were doing a fresh project, maybe?
Usually, if I'm just hacking, I don't bother.
Hmm.
I actually like JavaScript. Maybe I'm one of the few. I just really like um, how simple when it
Hmm.
is to use. But yeah, we all our libraries, for example, are TypeScript, and our dashboard is now we're migrating to TypeScript as well. I
Cool.
just I find it very verbose,
Yep.
especially when you start getting into some of the more obscure types.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's really a great tool if you're building, like our dashboard.
Yep.
Just a great tool.
Yeah. And there's definitely a difference, I think. It's hard to appreciate TypeScript if you only use it in a small demo, because then you're like, why
Mhm.
am I writing all of
Yep.
this code? And I don't really need it when it's just me working on the sample, but especially when you get into bigger things, which interestingly for me, like as a developer advocate, I don't have recent experience, or I don't work on like enterprise software anymore. So I'm kind of away from that where I'm doing these tutorials. So I get in this weird mix of like I kind of want to use TypeScript, but I feel like to do the stuff I'm working on, it sometimes it's too much, you know?
The other thing with libraries, if you're building libraries that people are going to use,
Yep.
then the types essentially gives them a lot of sort
Agreed.
of
Yeah.
self-documented stuff. So yeah, it's kind of critical if you're building an open source tool.
Yep, totally agree with that. Catherine, again, shout out to Catherine and starting her new job at GitHub at some point. But she is going exactly where I was going. She asked thoughts on REST versus GraphQL.
Yeah, this one we get often actually. To be honest, I haven't used a lot of GraphQL, and I know that people are really, really keen on it, and they ask us very often. I can see the benefits. The reason why we went with REST is just far more common. Yeah, especially in enterprise,
Mhm.
and there's just it's a tried, true, trusted platform. It's got all the things around HTTP two coming out and quick. And the thing is, the Postgres server works like it's very low level, so it really uses the database. Versus a GraphQL server, which has everything sort of in the middleware, and we're more like a database crew than middleware crew. The thing is, I could see us maybe implementing it at some stage, just not some stage soon, because Postgres, for example, the tool that we do has relational. You can build relationships. You can do single fetch. You can do most of the things,
Hmm.
and there's not a huge benefit except for preference, which is a valid
Yep.
thing. So at some point we'll do that. There are a lot of people who use Prisma with Supabase. So we have a connection pooler, so you can actually use Prisma as serverless if you want, and just plug it into the connection pooling mechanism of our database, and you don't have to use our APIs at all. So for now,
True.
it's
Yeah.
just like document. You can use it. We'll document at some stage how to use various tools with Supabase, but we won't support it ourselves probably for maybe another year.
Cool. Okay. I think that's a great answer. And I think it goes back to the idea of like you're doing a startup. It has to be prioritization. Like even though people want
Yeah.
GraphQL, is that the most important thing at this time, especially when they potentially have other options like Prisma in the meantime? I've got a question again. I've got lots. You mentioned Postgres with a T a couple of times. What's the difference between Postgres and something like Hasura? So Hasura does something similar where it kind of gives you the API in front of your database, I think. Is that right? Are they similar products?
Hasura is GraphQL,
Okay,
and
specifically
actually has
GraphQL.
specifically GraphQL, and they do some very cool stuff. So they've got stuff around auth. They've also got a dashboard
Hmm.
which they use that you can use to sort of configure your database. And then they do some things like remote schemas as well. So it's actually a very nice tool, but it's a GraphQL tool. Postgres is RESTful, but as well leveraging a lot of the stuff in the database. As a small example, you can write database functions called like store procedures, or actually they're functions
Hmm.
inside Postgres, and then you can use Postgres to call these database functions. And so everything's sitting right in your database rather than using the middleware to
Layers
do.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's great. Um, I have recently become a fan of Svelte. I actually, selfish shout out, just released a Svelte crash course this morning on YouTube.
Wow,
Have
nice.
you checked out Svelte? Have you had any experience with it? And if so, what are your thoughts?
In the very early days. So I don't know how many years ago it was. It would have been 20. I'm guessing 2017, 2018.
Okay.
I was checking it out. I was using it. It was kind of at the time that what's the really tiny React Preact
Hmm.
was coming out. It was kind of they came out at the same time, and I was a big fan of both of them. Just trying to keep the bundle size very
Yep.
small. I haven't used it for a couple of years, but we do have some examples, demos inside our
Cool.
repo with it, and it seems that it's becoming more and more popular. Um, I really like the reactive
Hmm.
reactivity within my app. I really like MobX, for example, and I really liked the view store compared to, say, Redux.
Yep.
And so, Svelte and Sapper, when they were coming out, I thought were very cool. So it's just one that I've got eyes on, and if I actually had time, I think I'd be building with it right now.
Yeah.
These days, I don't really have time to build, so I kind of just have to build demos with things that I know.
Yep.
But if I didn't, I think I'd probably be going very heavily into Svelte right now.
Cool. Yeah, I tried Svelte, and I should clarify the crash course I did today was Svelte Kit, which is still in beta, but has already I think made a lot of progress. But I tried Svelte for the first time, more or less like a couple weeks ago, and I published a video of like here's the reasons why I like Svelte. And to your point about data binding and reactivity and stores, actually were like two or three depending on how you look at it of the key things that I just love because I think that's one of the pieces that's missing is in React is just like what's the simplest way to store state and to have it accessed in multiple components. And you get into like the context API and providers and hooks. And I just thought that was a little too tricky to set
Mhm.
up originally versus with Svelte. Like you create the file, you import the writable thingy from the file, and then you can see the data. So that was one of the things I really liked, in addition to the data binding specifically. So if you're doing a form, it's like there's been lots of conversations in React about like how cumbersome it is to build a form in React, and it's felt you get like the two-way binding with just the
Mm.
bind colon keyword, and you're kind of good to go. So I
So
really enjoyed it.
when you're starting a new project now, what do you use? Which framework?
I don't know. But to be fair, like most of my new projects are like specifically demos for YouTube videos. So they would like it
Mm.
would specifically be a demo that's meant to use Felt or specifically one with Next.js or something. So I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I am still a huge fan of Next.js. So that's probably if I was doing something that I was gonna say I was gonna take more seriously, but I don't think that's a good one either. Svelte would be an option, and Svelte Kit I think would be an option. But Next.js is the one that I have spent the most time with recently, the most comfortable with. So I guess it would just depend on if I look at it as like a continued learning opportunity versus I'm trying to build something and get it done a little quicker.
Nice.
Yep. By the way, Chris Sev is in the chat commenting that forms are tough stuff in React, and they absolutely are. Also, shout out to Chris. Chris, I don't know if have you been streaming on Twitch under that brand? He also has the brand better.dev or better dev on YouTube, and him and Cap Kapehe, who's in DevRel at Sanity, have been doing a lot of videos on their YouTube channel and then doing streams on that channel as well on YouTube. So go and check out better dev on YouTube. He says he has done none streaming on Twitch recently. um, I want to give a maybe 30 seconds or so. Like I think I'm pretty good to wrap up. Thanks for answering all of my questions. If anyone has a last second question, we'll give 30 seconds or so just to see. Otherwise, I am super excited, I think, to see more and more people use Supabase. Everything that I hear, people really, really enjoy. And maybe I have like a million different technologies I want to like try and do videos on, but maybe I'll get around and do a Supabase video on YouTube as well, so I could try it out.
Cool. Yeah, we'd love that.
You did have a question. I forgot about this about t-shirt giveaway. I'm not going to put you on the spot for that, but is there any way for people? Do you have like a swag store? Is there any way for people to buy a t-shirt or a set of stickers or something if they're interested?
Yeah, we're bringing out a swag store. I guess then anyone who's listening to the stream, if you want a t-shirt, just email swag at supabase.io and say that you came from Copple. We'll send you one. My yeah, Rory, our head of growth, is going to hate me for this, but yeah, if you do that and you send your t-shirt size and your postal address, and we'll ship you one.
And I promise I wasn't trying to put you on the spot to give it away for free, which is why I asked about a store for people to purchase. Um, but since you did put that out
Yeah,
there, people should take advantage, not take advantage, but leverage it and sport some Supabase swag. I might follow up and send you one of those notes too.
oh
I'd
yeah,
love to
yeah,
have one.
definitely do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. Yeah, we just had, I don't know if you saw, but another, which angle is it? No, where is that light? Over there. Oh, it got turned off and then it got turned back on. Anyway, people are all over the place in the chat. So anyway, I had a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Your startup experience, the creation of Supabase, where it's going, that sort of stuff was really, really interesting to me. I hope to use it sometime in the near future for video or something. So keep an eye out for that. And then maybe we can talk more about streaming and maybe some Auth0 Supabase collaborations at some point in the near future as well. But thanks,
That'd be
thanks
cool.
again
Yeah.
for coming on and hanging out, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, James.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone in the chat as well. I don't see anyone online right now to raid over to, so I guess we'll just we'll call it a day. But thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it, and we'll catch you next Friday. I can't remember who the guest is. I'm blanking, but I'll see you next Friday for another stream. See ya.